see the bottoms of those Tacovas?
No,
those aren't them?
They haven't come in yet.
It looks, but I thought
they look just like them.
That's great. I bought these the day after we shot out there.
Nice.
Yeah, because it's the day they launched. I was like, well, I'm one of those people that thinks everything's going to sell out. So I'm like, I got to get them.
Yeah.
And they have plenty.
Okay.
Yeah, they have plenty. Yeah, go buy some Tacovas boots.
They look sharp.
Granger, how are you?
Man, I'm great.
It's been a long time since we just sat and done this, and I think now you are the person I've interviewed the most ever.
All right.
Yeah.
I like that title.
Yeah. The last one we did, just me and you, was Picture This, which will come back.
Which is great.
It's fun. I've had more people ask me in your meet and greet lines, when are you bringing Picture This back? Like, this is so boring. There's a lot of production, though, that goes into it.
Oh, yeah.
That I've been a little preoccupied.
Oh, yeah.
So I haven't done anymore. I actually have 3 or 4 in the bank. Like at Nico Moon. There's a great one with Nico Moon and Russell Dickerson that I have yet to produce.
Yeah, I understand, man, because that's why I've simplified my podcast over the years for that same reason, because Picture This takes a lot of preparation and a lot of post editing and work, and I can't imagine, unless that's your full-time gig, I can't imagine how you'd just say, it's time for another Picture This.
Right after I left radio, it was my full-time gig. That was all I was doing until we started doing Yee Radio. And so it was like, oh, cool. Yeah, I'll sit in here and produce this. I'll get some stuff up and rolling.
Yeah.
And so it will come back in 2022. And we've got to do a part 2 on that anyway. Today, there are no pictures. It's just us chatting. And there's a lot going on.
Yeah. Yeah.
Talk about your podcast first. You said it's kind of transitioned. When your very first one, you talked about how you got into the business. Contrast that to how it is now.
Yeah, I started the podcast to tell my story. I just found this scenario where so many times I was doing radio interviews and short-term answers, have a 10-second answer to, so how'd you get started in music? Yeah. Like radio loves to ask that question. Tell us a little bit how you got started. I saw that especially during Backroad Song.
I'll bet.
When it was my first national single, and 95% of the people I talked to had never met me or probably hadn't heard of me, except for the little one sheet that they were looking at behind the desk.
Yeah. And that was probably the first song for a lot of them too.
And that was the first song. So a very common question at that time would be, and it's a legitimate question, it's just hard to answer. They'd say, for those of us listening here in Milwaukee or wherever, what do we need to know about Granger Smith? Where are you from? Where'd you come from? How'd you start in music? And I'm just like, I know that in a radio format on FM radio, I have about 10 seconds to give a legitimate answer to that. So that led me to the idea of, why don't I start a podcast where I could start, because my story, everyone's story at some level in music is very different, and it's very intricate on how you got to where you are today. So I thought, I'll do a podcast and I'll just start going through episode 1, 2, and I'll start with where I came from and why I started music. And I did probably 15, 16 episodes like that, till I got to the point where 2 things happened. One, I started coming towards the end of where people didn't know about me to transitioning into people knew me then.
Yeah.
And then the second thing was, it just took a lot of time and effort to produce that, because it wasn't just sitting in front of a mic telling a story. I was playing audio clips, and I was interviewing, different people in my family to recall a certain specific story. So it took time and preparation. It would take, for one episode to record, it would take a few days of just me talking, and then a few days of post-production.
Which you were already doing with the Smiths.
Yeah. So eventually I realized, as a month would go by with no episode, a month and a half would go by with no episode, and I would get this nagging feeling inside, like, I got to do it. I got to do episode 17 at some point. And I knew it was important, but I talked to Parker. It was actually in this office when everything changed for that podcast, when Parker said, hey, we have some companies that want to run some ads on your podcast. And I thought, great. And they said, but in order to do that, you're going to need a consistent day that you release every week.
Oh, yeah.
And I was just like, I can't do it.
Not the way you were doing it.
Not the way I was doing it. And so we talked to this ad agency, and they said, well, one of the guys we have he's an author, and it was Ryan Holiday. He's written a lot of like self-help books, and what he does is he just answers people's questions. And I was like, that's a great thought.
Yeah.
Because I could do, and now the way it is now, I could flip a podcast out in just as long as it takes me to speak it, which is like an hour.
It's basically real time.
Real time.
Live to tape. Yeah.
Yeah. So because I don't edit it, I don't cut it. I start it, I read questions, I answer, and then I finish it. That's it.
That's it.
So I thought,
cool.
Great, I'll do it. I'll do it on Mondays, and I'll answer people's questions. And since then, there are people that go, I miss the old storytelling podcast, but for the most part, the evidence is in the numbers that the podcast is a lot more popular now.
Yeah, I mean, you're in the top 5 in music.
Yeah,
which is funny too, because it's not
it's
even
in
about
music, and it's
anymore.
not even about music anymore, really. But yeah, it's gotten a lot more popular, and you and I have talked about it. And certain things, if you're an entrepreneur listening to this, it's an interesting concept that when you become a mirror to people and you turn around everything you're talking about to them, they are more interested.
Way more interested in themselves, aren't they?
Yeah. Yeah. Which is great. It's great.
It is. I mean, well, I think that's also our connection. It's when you find the similarities. It's like, I found something hey, Granger and I have that in common.
Yeah, right.
That's reflecting back on me. Me.
Right.
You mentioned that, like, when you're answering radio questions, that you knew you had about 10, 15 seconds. Was that something taught to you, or is that something you learned doing interviews?
Man, that's a great question, because I've gotten it a lot. People have mentioned, you've gone through media training, and I haven't.
Some do.
I haven't. Yes, some do. And I know some people sign a record deal and immediately go into what they call media training.
Some need it.
I didn't. I never did. I gave my testament to why I didn't is not anything natural within me. It's because of growing up in small market radio, where I was being interviewed on a radio station that, just a few hundred people listened to. It was tiny stations in tiny towns. And so learning through that taught me more and more. I actually got in deep trouble for this exact conversation one time.
Really?
On the red carpet, because I had a national single and some national success, and they said, what do you think about starting out in Texas country? And I got in to say I got in hot water over this is an understatement.
Who'd you get in trouble from?
It was an interview from The Boot, which is like a publication, website publication, And they asked me what I thought about growing up in Texas country. And my heart, when I heard that question, was what we're talking about. It's like, man, I am here because of Texas country. It taught me everything coming up through the small radio stations. I know there's big stations in Texas country, but there are also very small mom and pop radio stations. And growing up through that for me was, as I said, quote, like the minor leagues of baseball.
Yeah.
When you're coming up through the farm leagues and you're learning through these minor league camps, it prepares you for the big leagues. And saying that minor league statement got quoted. And there was some Texas country artist. One of his name is Dalton Domino. I'm not afraid to say it because it was a big deal at the time. Dalton Domino, who's a Texas country artist out of Lubbock, found that quote out of context. Texas country is the minor leagues or whatever, And he screenshotted it and posted it on Twitter. And then several other bigger tiered artists caught it. Wade Bowen was one of them. And he quote tweeted that and said, something, I don't remember exactly what he said, something to the extent of, Texas till I die, it's never the minor leagues to me. And so then all the grassroots fans of Wade, it just made me look like a complete a-hole.
Yeah.
And I understand how that happened. And I'm absolutely not faulting Dalton or Wade, because as they took that out of context, it sounded like this chump coming up and thinks he's a hot mess right now, and he's downplaying what I have done for so many years. So
he's got a Nashville song now.
I get it. Yeah, he thinks he's great, and his music actually sucks. And so I totally understand that. And And that was the first time in my career when I was in deep trouble with the media. And it's hard to explain. I've had this happen, since then several times, but that was the first time. And I remember my label calling me, John Lobet, the label. And he, in a very calm voice, he said, "I know it seems like the walls are closing in and there's no escape and your whole career is imploding right now. But I promise you, as I've seen this happen many, many, many times with artists, it will eventually just pass. And media forgets and they move on and people move on and you will eventually get out of it." And he was right.
What a great voice in the middle of that storm.
I needed to hear it. He had been through stuff with Jason Aldean and all kinds of things that pop up.
He probably especially with the political world that's going on right now. He's probably going through something with Jason right now.
Yeah. Yeah. So I needed that. And the one thing I did was I got on the phone that day and started calling every one of my peers and my heroes in Texas country, all of them. I'm talking Randy Rogers, Pat Green, Casey Donahue, Aaron Watson, Cody Johnson, everyone that had a name in Texas country. And guys that even were up and coming and didn't have a name. I called them personally and just said, man, because they all knew it.
Yeah.
And
it spread like wildfire.
They all knew it.
Yeah.
And so I called them and I just said, "I want you to hear my voice and I want you to hear my heart. That's not the context I meant to say minor leagues in. Do I regret it? Yes. But at the same time, it was not what I meant to say."
That had to mean so much to them too, that you took time out to call.
99% of them said, "Bro, absolutely. I've said the same thing in different ways." Yeah.
Well, you brought up the label. Cool if we go there?
Yeah.
Yeah, you're not on the... Well, let's start off by saying, when you were coming up through the ranks, from being an unknown artist to being a known artist, one of the goals when you're an unknown artist is to get to a level that you get a phone call from a Nashville record label that says, "You know what? We're kind of liking what you're doing. We want the world to know about it. We want to sign you." That's the goal of... And if somebody says it's not, they're lying.
Yeah.
Even the bar band that you saw over the weekend, if someone called from Nashville from a record label and said that they wanted to sign them, they would lose their mind, because that is, as an artist, that's the goal. You got it. Number one song, several top 10, top 15, top 20 songs, and then you have chosen to step away from a record label deal. Yeah.
And that's something we're kind of, we're still in the middle of that, and it's nothing at all on the record label. In fact, I love those people there.
Yeah.
They've been nothing but good to me. You do too.
You used to host the party for that label.
Yeah, you did.
The CMA party.
Yeah.
For a long time, for 5-6 years. And they're some of my favorite people in the business, and genuinely some of my great friends in the business.
Yeah.
Are at that label.
Yeah, and the bottom line for all that is just I feel like it's time to start exploring other options that's not just music. Yee Radio is a perfect example.
Yeah.
Having Yee Radio is a new venture that I'm very excited about. The podcast is another example. Very excited. I'm at the beginning process of writing a book. The beginning process of starting to be a radio host myself, which is crazy. By the time this podcast comes out, that press release will have come out.
Yeah. We're going to talk about that in a minute. Yeah.
None of those are really none of them are the one reason why I think it's time to make a change, but it's a combination of all of them, and maybe more than any, the calling to ministry that I've had, that I just needed to free up some mental space and some time, and running a radio single to national radio takes a lot of time and travel and effort, and it was time for me to step away for the time being from that.
Even in the time that you got the deal to now, the landscape of what it looks like to release a song has changed dramatically.
It has.
It's not the same as it used to be. I mean, from the time that when I started in radio in '94, then it was obviously way different than now. But even in the last several years, it's sped up. And the way you do it, I mean, just look at TikTok, just look at Instagram, and how people who they haven't played in bars and they haven't worked their way up through
the
any
Island
kind of
Boys.
scene. Oh my gosh, you gotta be kidding me! I did see that they got booed off the stage the other night.
I did see that.
I was like, now it's starting to fit. No, but you see people come up and become almost instantly famous with sometimes a legitimately really good song being discovered completely different ways, and where the work that you have to, I say that you still work, but it's not the traveling, 8 days out of the week to try to support that record, which is what you would have to do, especially as a newly signed artist, right?
Yeah, I mean, we're talking as soon as 2 decades ago only, that was the only way that you're ever going to, quote, make it in music, was to get a record deal.
Yeah.
It was the only way. And then things started, probably about 2004 or 5, things started to change, and there became new paths to have success in the music business. Texas country is a great example of what has happened. So many guys have had great success. I mean, massive success with no record label, but it's only every year only accelerates that. That's not to say that it's still a very viable way to get to the top of the music industry.
Yeah.
It would be rare now to make it to the top. I'm talking, when I say the top, I mean you're selling out Heinz Field in Pittsburgh.
Stadiums, exactly.
And you have 8 semis and you're winning Grammys. That is almost impossible to do it without a record label today.
Yeah.
That window is widening on the opportunity, but it's still a very big deal, but not exactly where I would need or want to be right now.
Yeah. You brought up the ministry, and we were talking about the podcast. Do you feel like that those two have worked in tandem to further that calling you've started to feel in your heart? I
think so. I don't know which one came first, but I don't know. But maybe the podcast confirmed that this is a right path.
Sure.
That this is something that I'm finding extreme fulfillment from, speaking into people's lives in a positive way, and using the Bible as a reference in a open media platform, and that led me to seeing a lot more people that are speaking to large groups of people. Could be a leadership conference or a youth conference or a church, but I've seen a lot of people that get on these stages and they're speaking life into people for 25 minutes. And when they walk off the stage, I look at that and I go, wow, what an impact you made. Not to say that music can't have an impact, and it has a massive impact, but it's a different kind. It's a different way. It's a different form of an impact that I'm very attracted to. And I'm looking at myself in the back half, the second half essentially of my life. And I have to ask the question, when I'm 65, God willing, if I'm 65, what kind of stage do I want to be walking off of at the end of the day? Yeah. And I look at a guy like John Maxwell, very successful author and public speaker, and I go, man, how cool would it be to be John Maxwell walking off the stage instead of old Granger singing backroad song,
Well, think about the time of day that they walk off that stage too.
Yeah, it's a lot better hours. You get a lot more sleep.
Not 1 a.m. Exactly. By that time, radio. We've touched on that already on this podcast, and along with the record label deal, you're always, an artist is always looking for that first time to be played on the radio too. Mm-hmm. You remember what song it was and what you were doing the first time you heard your song on a radio
very
station?
first time radio of any sort was when I was in college, and it was a song called "On Earth as It Is in Texas." And I was at Texas A&M, and I was a sophomore in the Corps Cadets at A&M, and it came on my alarm clock as I was studying, and I didn't expect it or know it or pitch it, or
it just happened.
It just happened, and I lost my mind running up and down the dorm room hallway,
You didn't even get to hear the song, did you? You just screaming?
No, I didn't hear it. I was screaming because it was on KORA, and that's so. I always remember KORA is a special station for me. The first time I heard a song on FM radio.
That's cool. Where'd you do your first interview?
I don't know that, Ant. I don't know the first interview. It must have been. Oh, you know what? I do know what it was.
Yeah,
it just came to me. It was on the Wolf 99.5 in Dallas. With Cody Allen.
That was your very first?
That was
interview
my very
on the radio?
first one, and I was 19, and my dad set it up.
Are you serious?
Yeah, my dad worked.
He's called Cody.
He worked over there, close to the station, and he walked in one day with my very first album.
Yeah,
and the Wolf was famous in Dallas. We all knew the Wolf, and my dad walked into a very young Cody. He must have been low 20s.
How about that?
And he said, "This is my son. I don't know if you take unsolicited work here, but this is my son, and he lives here." And Cody actually listened to it.
Yeah.
And he called my dad. My dad left his number, and he called my dad, and he said, "Hey, I like this stuff. That you said he's 19," and my dad was like, "Yeah." And Cody said, "Can you bring him up here?" And I went up there, and I was Charlie Robison was co-hosting a show with Cody that was that featured local talent.
Was that the Back Porch?
I think so.
Yeah,
I think it was. I couldn't remember
the show.
Yeah,
Honda was doing it
exactly.
But the actual name of the show, I think, has stayed with whoever was, no matter who was hosting it. And I think it was called the Back Porch. Or front porch
the front porch or back porch, one of the porches.
Yeah.
And I came in there with Charlie and Cody, and I remember going into the station just nervous.
Yeah.
And
that's a big station to have your first interview on.
And I remember what Charlie said to me. He said, "Man, you're starched from head to toe." Because everything I had starch on it.
The jeans, the shirt, everything. Yep.
Yeah.
What year was that? The
1999 or 2000. Yeah, probably 99 or 2000, somewhere in there.
Everything was starched in especially the back half of the 90s, for sure.
Yeah.
Dude, that's awesome.
Yeah.
On the Wolf.
Yeah.
With Cody.
Yeah.
So does that lead into this?
Yeah, it can.
It has to.
Yeah.
So you hear your song the first time on the radio, memorable moment, cool reliving that, having your first interview. The guy that you have your first interview with, you're now replacing on the radio.
Yeah.
As not the person being interviewed, but the person interviewing.
Just crazy.
On maybe in country, arguably the biggest show in country music radio, After Midnite.
Man, so bizarre and wild.
Blair Garner started that show back when he lived in LA and sold it as a syndicate. He shopped it, got it out there. He was one of the guys I looked up to in radio, Blair Garner was. And I got a chance to work with him in the same building in Nashville and would have chances to talk to him. Because I remember talking to him because you could call, like if you had a problem with the show, which I was, working on at the station when I was coming up in the ranks, when you would call to get support, he was the support. Hey, there's something wrong with this. And Blair Garner's the one answering the phone for a while.
Yeah.
And then to talk to him in the hallway, working alongside him was super cool. He sold the show to Premiere and then stayed on as the host. And then when he left, Cody Allen became a host of it. Now Cody is moving on and Granger Smith is the host. This is massive. This is 500 stations.
It's insane. And so Cody and I, since the Wolf, we lost touch for probably about at least 10 years, maybe a little more than 10 years after that. Cody, his career exploded after the Wolf, and as he got older, he went all kinds of places, but CMT was one of the main places he landed.
His old boss from the Wolf became the president of CMT.
Is that the connection?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I mean, Cody's got a great voice, kind of like you. He's just naturally born with the ability to talk.
He
on
has
the
a
radio.
charisma about him that is just always attractive, like to listen to watch on TV. I've got a cool story, a New York story about Cody that I'll share with you. But he has that personality that you feel like you're hanging out with him when you're listening.
Yeah. So I reconnected with Cody after the record deal, and I saw him at a stadium show for CMA Fest.
Okay.
In Nashville, and Cody. I remember this because of the connection with my dad. My dad is the one that set this up. Yeah. The first thing he said was, "How is your dad?" And I said, "Man, he just died. We just lost him.
He just passed away."
And Cody, you could just see he was just like, "I'm so sorry." Because Cody knew him, and he's like, man, he was just a great man. And so that was a little bit of a bonding for Cody and I, that moment. And then through the different radio singles, Cody and I connected more and more through interviews and a lot of interaction on CMT. We actually took a trip together to Alaska, Cody and I, for a military tour.
No way.
With CMT.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah, and then we were together in Mexico for Crash My Playa.
Yep.
So there's this strange connection I've had with Cody for 2 decades.
Where your paths just continue to cross.
Where our paths continue to cross. And then the craziest part of the whole story is what's happening right now. So CMT is parting ways from Premiere for the first time in like 8 years or something like that. They've been partners with iHeart for about at least 8 years. They're parting ways and going different directions with each of the media companies. Cody goes with CMT, so he's power to that package. So he's leaving with CMT, and they have this vacancy now at After Midnite, the very show that Cody hosts on the radio. And Tyler, I didn't know this was happening, of course, but then Tyler calls me and says, hey, I have a call with Rod Phillips, who is, what's Rob's title at iHeart?
Big boss of country at iHeart.
Yeah,
that's what
I'll
I like
take
to call
it.
him.
Big boss
he's
country
over
iHeart.
Everything that has to do with country at iHeart.
Rod Phillips is the guy that if you want to get a song played, if you're an artist that wants to get a song played, he's the gatekeeper.
His phone number is
He's the gatekeeper.
He is, yeah.
Like there's a lot of people that make decisions, but he's like the guy at the edge of the castle with the sword. Like you can't get to any of the people unless he likes you or approves of you. And it's not always a personal thing. It needs to be said. It's not, as you know, you've worked for iHeart. It's not always a personal thing. It hardly ever is. It's a lot of times it's about numbers. Mm-hmm. It's about song sales and streams and how it's doing with the public. So, in all fairness to Rod, he holds that sword and he does a pretty good job at it because his job depends on it.
Yeah, for sure.
How he wields that sword. So when Tyler says I have a call with Rod, it's not that weird because we've interacted with Rod. He came to Yee Yee Day. Yeah,
that's right. Oh, he did. He did. He came this year.
He came to the Yee Yee farm to Yee Yee Day. So it's not that weird.
He went mudding.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So from a perspective of an artist, it's like, oh, cool. Let me know what he says. And, but what I got from that was far different than anything I imagined. Tyler calls back and goes, I'll talk to Rod and he wants you to host After Midnite. That's exactly how Tyler said it. And I was like,
super dry, super.
I'm like, well, what did he really say?
Yeah.
He's like, no, I'm serious. He wants you to host After Midnite. And I was like, anyway, well, so what are you guys doing this weekend? Are you going to the ranch, Tyler? Are you seeing Mom? Is Mom coming here? And he's like, oh yeah, I think I'm going to go check the deer traps. And literally we hung up the phone.
And just moved on.
Yeah. And the next day he was like, did you think any more about that After Midnite thing? And I was like, I'm serious, Tyler. Like, I know it's a joke, but what did Rod say? He's like, man, I'm trying to tell you, they want you to host After Midnite. And I was like, me? I'm not qualified. I'm not a radio guy. I don't have a broadcast voice. I don't have any credibility. What are you talking about? It didn't make any sense. That's like saying, hey, NASA called and they want you to fly the next shuttle. I mean, that's about as far-fetched as that could be.
I understand why you feel that way, but I completely disagree with 98% of what you just said. So yeah, I mean, you have all the credibility. You have, I mean, I think the cool thing, and you even see it because Rod is responsible, whether you like him or not. Rod is responsible for Bobby Bones being on as many stations as he is.
Yeah,
and the biggest reason is because he wasn't the normal morning show.
Yeah.
He wasn't the, all right, let's check time and temp, which is what we were used to. Big voice, you know, fills up the entire room telling you about that was, this is. No, Bobby was dorky little dude talking about his life, and everybody was like, he held the mirror up and pointed it back at his audience, and they're like, I'm the same way. And Rod took notice of that, and so he has a nice little track record. So when he says that he thinks you should do After Midnight, there's some credibility there on why you should do After Midnight.
It's insane. I can't express how crazy it is, and then it's also strange for me, looking internally to me. It's strange that I was so open to the opportunity. Like, yeah, that sounds like a great challenge, and it's going to take a lot of my time, and it's going to be It's literally one of the first times I can remember having a boss in like 15 years. I'll actually have a boss.
So all that time, after leaving the label and not doing it's being filled right back up with radio.
With radio.
Exactly. From
the other side. Yeah. And I was in this room. I was actually in this chair telling you about this. You're one of the first people to know.
Just a couple of months ago, yeah.
And if there was any hesitancy from me at the time when I told you, it was cleared when you said, take it. That's an amazing opportunity. And I was like, really?
Huge.
Yeah. You said, no, it's a big opportunity. You should take it.
I know a lot of you that are listening or watching right now are thinking, well, I'm not up between midnight and 5 a.m.
Yeah.
It's a numbers game too, though, because there are people that are up, that are working, that are traveling, they're doing whatever. And then it's on so many stations that you're talking to a ton of people, and having it's still, as an artist, After Midnight, it's still a huge impact for the song. Yeah, especially if they're going for a number one. If you're going for number one, After Midnight and your song plays an extra spin on After Midnight, and you do an interview, changes the entire game for that artist, whether they hit the number one or stay at number two that week.
And I feel that. I feel the weight of that, and I think it's unique in my situation. I think it's almost similar to the way I've been describing it to people. It's almost similar to like the trend that ESPN has done over the years, that they went from the broadcast guys that were, had journalism degrees, and it started transitioning into athletes until you get to the point where when you're listening to Tony Romo, you believe him because he would when he's watching that play clock and it's counting down, and Tony knows what that quarterback's thinking, and it makes credibility happen from the audience perspective. And so
it's like Nostradamus too.
Yeah. So I feel the weight of when I'm on hosting After Midnight and I'm playing a song, theoretically, introducing a song, I feel the weight of what that song means to that artist that I'm playing at that time, and how life-changing it could be for an artist that's battling for a number one or a top 10 or a top 40 in any situation. That spin is changing the dynamic of his whole career.
It is.
I can't understate that, and I feel the weight of it.
Because you've been there.
I've been there.
You were the quarterback trying to decide which.
I've gotten the call from a record label, and it's usually not like a phone call. It's like a Zoom call where there's like 7 people, and they go, we have exciting news. Get the champagne ready. What? You got added to After Midnight. And it's like, people are crying. Yeah. People are literally crying over something like that.
Yep. So it changes the game.
It changes the game. And so for me to be on the other side, the flip side, and know that we're changing lives and it matters, and that's just the artist perspective. That's not even talking about the listener perspective, because the listener perspective, we're talking 7 nights a week, midnight to 5 or 6, sometimes 6 a.m. I'm speaking into these people's houses and cars and earbuds at a very vulnerable time. And as I was thinking of a quote for the press release for this, I wanted to say that on the press release, but I didn't know if it would be appropriate to say it's a vulnerable time. But as humans, that's our witching hour.
Yeah.
Like that's our vulnerable time is midnight to 6 a.m. In terms of I'm speaking to people coming out of the bars on Friday and Saturday nights. I'm speaking to the graveyard shift workers, the truckers, the over-the-road truckers, the mothers waking up to nurse babies, the people getting up early for work, driving to the airport, driving to the job site. And people during that hour are vulnerable to what they're hearing. And it matters. The songs matter. Yep. The voice matters because it's setting the tone for the day or the end of the day. And I have to juggle both of those. And so I didn't really think about all this when I first got the job offer, but I do now. And I have to think that there is a greater purpose to all of it, a greater calling to all of this for me to be in here. And I have to think for me, in my biblical perspective, it has to be a God thing. Yeah. Because they know at Premiere and they know at iHeart that I'm an openly Christian man and they do not care. And that's very special that a massive media company doesn't care if I speak from a perspective of a biblical perspective. Not that I'm going to be preaching the gospel on After Midnight. I'm not. But there's an opportunity to speak life in these little intervals throughout the night when people are most vulnerable, and it matters.
Well, anyone who talks to you spends any time, whether it's in a meet and greet or even at a concert, they can see how full your heart is of what God has put in there and what God is doing in your life. And the Bible says, out of the abundance of your heart, your mouth speaks. So no matter what you say on After Midnight, inevitably what is in your heart is going to come out.
Oof, that's good.
Regardless of introducing a song or talking about new music you've got or anything like that, there's just a different wrapping that goes on it when your heart is full of something different than maybe what that third shift worker has. They may be full of anger, and they may be full of depression. They may be full of anything. And when yours is full of joy and love and peace, it's going to come through and pierce differently than other words from other people who may not have that same thing.
Man, amen to that. Yeah, absolutely. That's a huge responsibility that I'm fully accepting.
I can't wait. I'll stay up and listen, man.
Don't do that. I'll be too nervous. The first couple months, I'm like, I hope AntMan doesn't do this because that's bad. That's just bad radio.
Oh, do I get to air check you? Do I get to record him and go, Granger, let's sit down and talk about? No, that right there. Man. That's what Rod's supposed to be doing.
Oh,
so
man.
I'm gonna put that back on
terrible.
Him. Well, let's talk about new music. Are you working on some new stuff?
So through the transition with the label, I've kind of hit the brakes on that a little bit, but there are things that I need to start the process on. So there will be new music in 2022.
I can't wait for that. That's going to be fun. We've got to obviously premiere it on Yee Radio.
Yeah, we'll premiere it on Yee Radio.
Yeah. I can't wait for that. That'd be fun to do.
Yeah.
Dude, this is fun. I always enjoy sitting down, just chatting with you, whether there are mics or not, but I love sitting down and chatting with you, reliving some of these stories.
I love it. I love this format.
A lot more of these to do, especially after you. I mean, then I'll sit here and you can interview me because you'll be, we'll practice for your interview with Luke Combs that you'll have for another number one and stuff like that.
Yeah, right.
I'll help prep you.
Okay? Yeah. Okay. Fair enough.
When do you start on After Midnight?
January 1, apparently.
That's the very first show.
Yeah.
Yeah. Stay up late. Listen to the very first show.
Yeah, absolutely.